The GOAT, Caitlin Clark, is back on the court. Tears coming to my eyes, man. Tears coming to my eyes. I thought I'd never see the day. We thought we'd never see the day, but we are here. The GOAT is back dominating on the court at Team USA camp.
The gym was supposed to be routine. Another quiet Team USA practice, another controlled scrimmage, another day of systems and sets. Then Caitlin Clark stepped onto the court, and everything cracked open. Energy hit like a surge, not loud but electric, the kind that snaps heads up without a word. Her eyes were locked, jaw set, movements sharp, as if every step was a statement. This wasn't a rookie audition. It felt like a challenge. Shots fell hard, passes whipped through tight windows, and the pace spiked until even veterans exchanged looks. The whispers started fast, the kind that follow moments that don't ask permission. Was this confidence, or was this something else? Coaches tracked clipboards, assistants paused, and the air thickened with pressure. Clark kept pushing, calling for the ball, demanding reps, turning drills into duels. No smiles, no apologies, just intent. It felt personal, even if no names were spoken. By the final whistle, the court was quiet, the kind of quiet that follows impact. Phones buzzed, eyes searched, and someone murmured that this wouldn't stay contained. Because when Caitlin Clark plays like that, it forces choices from everyone watching. And Team USA had just felt the first tremor of what comes next, whether they were ready or not. The practice doors closed, but the message escaped, spreading fast through group chats, front offices, and timelines, setting up a reckoning that would test roles, egos, and selection before the next cut was ever announced. The clock had started. Now, long before that practice ignited, Caitlin Clark had learned how to carry momentum like a burden. Every gym she entered before Team USA came with expectations stitched into the air. High school bleachers packed beyond fire code. College arenas shaking under chants that sounded less like support and more like demand. She was celebrated loudly, but celebration came with conditions. Perform, elevate, don't disrupt, don't expose the cracks in the system that benefited from her brilliance. From the outside, her rise looked effortless. From the inside, it was a constant calibration between hunger and restraint. She was taught early that confidence could be mistaken for arrogance, that assertiveness could be rebranded as entitlement. So she learned to smile through pressure, to answer questions carefully, to let her game speak even when her voice wanted to scream. Team USA had always been the dream, but also the test. The jersey meant legacy, hierarchy, unspoken rules about knowing your place. Veterans had earned their space through years of grind, international gold, quiet sacrifice. Caitlin respected that deeply. She also understood something others avoided saying out loud, that the game had changed and the weight of attention had shifted with it. That shift made people uneasy. Some players welcomed it, seeing opportunity and growth. Others felt displaced, like history was being fast-forwarded without consent. Caitlin sensed it in subtle ways. Delayed passes in drills, cool nods instead of warm welcomes, conversations that paused when she approached. None of it was hostile. All of it was intentional. She carried that tension with her into every practice rep. Off the court, the noise never stopped. Analysts debated whether she was ready. Former players questioned whether hype had outrun experience. Fans argued in absolutes, building her up or tearing her down with equal ferocity. Caitlin didn't engage publicly, but she absorbed everything. Silence wasn't ignorance. It was strategy. Behind closed doors, her circle warned her about expectations that didn't align with reality. About how Team USA valued cohesion over spectacle, control over chaos. They told her to blend, to adapt, to wait. Caitlin listened, and quietly wrestled with the idea that waiting had never been how she changed games. Her basketball identity had always been kinetic. She thrived in movement, in improvisation, in moments where instinct beat instruction. That wasn't rebellion. That was who she was. And trying to compress that energy into something palatable had never worked for long. She also knew the stakes were different here. A bad stretch in college invited criticism. A misstep with Team USA invited erasure. Selection wasn't just about performance. It was about trust, politics, optics. Caitlin understood that being undeniable didn't always mean being selected. That knowledge hardened her. Every workout became a referendum. Every scrimmage felt like an audition scored by invisible metrics. She watched how praise was distributed, how mistakes were contextualized differently depending on whose name was on the jersey. None of it shocked her, but it sharpened her awareness. She wasn't fighting players. She was fighting assumptions. By the time that explosive practice arrived, Caitlin had reached a quiet conclusion. If she toned herself down, she'd disappear into the noise. If she pushed too hard, she'd be labeled difficult. There was no safe middle. So she chose the only option that had ever worked: be unmistakable. That decision wasn't loud. It didn't come with speeches or declarations. It showed up in footwork, in tempo, in the way she demanded the ball not out of ego but necessity. The practice didn't feel like a statement because she announced it. It felt like a statement because she refused to shrink. Others felt it immediately. Some admired it. Some bristled. Some recognized it as a warning shot across a system that preferred order over evolution. Coaches took notes, not just on performance but on chemistry, on reactions, on how the room shifted when Caitlin asserted herself without asking permission. And Caitlin felt something shift inside her too. Not confidence, she already had that. Resolve. She realized that whatever happened next, she wouldn't compromise the version of herself that made her dangerous. That realization was freeing and terrifying at the same time, because it meant accepting consequences she couldn't control. As practice ended and the doors closed, she sat alone for a moment, lacing up slower than usual, aware that she'd crossed an invisible line. Not a rule, a threshold. Selection conversations were already happening. Narratives were already forming. And whether she made the final roster or not, one thing was suddenly clear. The explosion on that court wasn't an anomaly. It was a declaration, and the system would have to decide whether it could handle the energy it had helped create, or whether it would try to contain it before it burned everything comfortable to the ground. What should have been a technical breakdown turned into something sharper, more charged. Clips rolled on the screen, possessions slowed down, pauses lingering longer than usual. Caitlin Clark's name came up early, then again, then again. Not because she missed rotations or forced shots, but because her presence had bent the practice around her. Pace changed when she touched the ball. Spacing warped. Defensive schemes reacted faster than planned. And that was the problem. One assistant pointed out that the tempo spiked beyond the drill's intent. Another mentioned that structure had been compromised. The words were neutral, but the implication wasn't. Caitlin felt it immediately. The familiar sensation of excellence being reframed as disruption. She spoke up. Calm. Direct. Not defensive. She said the reads were there. That the defense collapsed. That the pass was right. She backed it with a clip. Silence followed. The kind that doesn't mean agreement. It means recalibration. That was the first fracture. Because challenging interpretation in that room wasn't normal. Not for someone without medals. Not for someone still being evaluated. Caitlin hadn't raised her voice, hadn't broken protocol, but she had crossed an invisible boundary. And everyone knew it. The energy shifted instantly. Some teammates avoided eye contact. Others watched closely, curious, impressed, uneasy. Veterans understood what had just happened. This wasn't about one play anymore. It was about authority. About who gets to define right when the game is evolving faster than the system managing it. By the next practice, the temperature was different. Defensive pressure on Caitlin ramped up. Hard hedges. Physical switches. Nothing dirty, just aggressive enough to test resilience. Caitlin responded the only way she knew how. Sharper decisions, deeper range, quicker release. She didn't back off. She escalated with precision. That's when the whispers turned into tension. A missed rotation by someone else was corrected quietly. Caitlin's rare mistake was dissected publicly. The imbalance didn't need explanation. She felt it in real time, like gravity pulling harder on her than anyone else. Then came the twist no one saw coming. Mid-practice, drills stopped. Coaches huddled longer than usual. Names were called for individual conversations. Caitlin wasn't one of them, at first. She waited, stretching, replaying sequences in her head, aware that something procedural had just gone off script. When her name finally came, it wasn't to review film. It was to discuss fit. The word landed heavy. Fit wasn't about talent. Everyone in that gym had talent. Fit was about conformity, about how much of yourself you were expected to sand down to preserve equilibrium. Caitlin listened as she was told her energy was undeniable, her impact obvious, and that the staff needed to evaluate how that translated in international play, in shared leadership environments, in moments where hierarchy mattered. She nodded. She asked one question. Would the reads have been wrong if someone else made them? No one answered directly. That was the answer. Word spread fast. Not officially, nothing ever is. But players talk. Glances connect dots faster than memos. By dinner, everyone knew Caitlin's spot wasn't being evaluated on performance alone. It was being weighed against comfort. The locker room split quietly. Some players empathized, having lived versions of the same conversation earlier in their careers. Others felt the tension as a threat, not personal, but positional. If Caitlin redefined what leadership looked like, it would rearrange long-set dynamics. Social media sensed it before the public did. Practice clips leaked, harmless on the surface, explosive in context. Fans noticed who ran sets, who didn't, who got touches late, who was framed as aggressive versus passionate. Speculation exploded. Commentators started asking the question everyone in the gym was avoiding. Was Team USA evaluating Caitlin Clark, or resisting what she represented? Then the real shock hit. A respected insider reported that Caitlin was not a lock for the final roster. The phrase detonated. Fans reacted instantly. Analysts scrambled. Former players took sides. Some defended the process. Others called it political. Caitlin said nothing. She showed up the next morning earlier than usual, shot alone, headphones in, expression unreadable. Practice that day was ruthless. Every possession felt like a referendum. Caitlin played free but not reckless, aggressive but not defiant. She hit shots that bent logic. She made passes that forced teammates into space they hadn't expected to occupy. The gym buzzed, not celebratory but charged. At one point, after a deep three snapped the net, a veteran shook her head, half smiling, half exasperated. It wasn't disapproval. It was recognition. The coaches noticed too. And that's when the pressure flipped. Instead of containing Caitlin, they leaned into her, briefly. She ran actions. She closed scrimmages. The energy surged. Everyone felt it. And that scared people who had built success on predictability. After practice, no announcements came. Just silence. That silence said more than any cut list could. Because now the conflict wasn't whether Caitlin Clark was good enough. It was whether Team USA was willing to evolve fast enough to keep up with her. And as selection day crept closer, one thing became painfully clear. Whatever decision was coming wouldn't just decide a roster. It would signal what kind of future the program was willing to accept. And Caitlin, walking out of the gym under a sky already darkening, knew she'd forced a choice that couldn't be undone. The escalation didn't arrive with an announcement. It crept in through body language, through who was spoken to and who was spoken around, through subtle shifts that only people inside elite rooms ever learned to read. The next scrimmage opened with an altered rotation. Nothing dramatic on paper, but everyone felt it. Caitlin Clark started on the second unit. Not benched, repositioned. The explanation floated vaguely: balance, experimentation, flexibility. The message landed sharply anyway. This wasn't about rest. It was about control. Caitlin clocked it immediately. She didn't react. She didn't ask questions. She adjusted her shoes, bounced on her toes, and waited. When she checked in, the energy followed her like a storm front. The pace lifted again. The defense scrambled. Shots fell. Teammates leaned into lanes they hadn't trusted before. The bench buzzed with quiet disbelief. And that's when the first crack turned into a fault line. Mid-possession, a set was called. Caitlin saw something different. She waved it off, not disrespectfully, just instinctively, and made the read anyway. The ball snapped to the corner. 3 points. Clean. Immediate. The whistle blew. Not for the coach's voice cut through the gym, measured but firm. The message wasn't about the shot. It was about the decision. About execution versus improvisation. About staying within structure. Caitlin listened, nodded once, eyes steady. But something had changed. The room felt it. This wasn't coaching anymore. It was containment. From that moment on, the practice split in two realities. On the court, Caitlin continued to elevate the game. Off the court, the system tightened around her. Film sessions grew colder. Feedback became more abstract. Praise softened. Critique sharpened. Then came the second twist, the one that no one outside the room was supposed to know. Late one evening, a confidential evaluation document circulated among staff. Not leaked publicly, not shared with players, but information in elite environments never stays locked. Someone talked. Someone always does. The document didn't question Caitlin's talent. It questioned her manageability. The word hit like a slap. Manageability wasn't about basketball IQ or effort. It was about whether a player could be steered, absorbed, blended without warping the system. Caitlin had just warped everything. Not maliciously, not recklessly, but undeniably. By morning, the mood had shifted again. Teammates approached her differently. Some with encouragement, quiet and sincere. Some with distance, unsure how proximity might be interpreted. One veteran pulled her aside briefly, offering a look that said more than words ever could. This isn't fair, but it's familiar. Caitlin absorbed it all. She'd lived versions of this before. The difference now was scale. This wasn't one program or one coach. This was the highest level, the most symbolic jersey, the place where excellence was supposed to be enough. The pressure intensified publicly too. A harmless practice report dropped online, framing Caitlin's style as high-risk and non-traditional. The wording was careful, but fans saw through it instantly. Debates exploded. Clips were analyzed frame by frame. Every creative decision became evidence either for brilliance or selfishness, depending on who was narrating. Team USA stayed silent. That silence did damage. Caitlin's camp noticed something else that week, subtle but alarming. Conversations about post-Olympic opportunities shifted tone. Invitations stalled. Partnerships hesitated. Nothing was revoked, but momentum slowed, like a car easing off the gas without touching the brakes. The message was unmistakable. Alignment mattered. That's when Caitlin made her move. Not publicly. Not emotionally. Strategically. During a closed-door feedback session, she didn't argue her role. She didn't plead her case. Instead, she asked a series of questions, calm, precise, impossible to misinterpret. She asked how adaptability was being measured. She asked whether creativity was being scored differently depending on who executed it. She asked if the goal was to win or to preserve comfort. No one accused her of insubordination, but the room went quiet again. Later that day, the roster meeting was delayed, then delayed again. By evening, players were sent home without clarity. Phones buzzed with speculation. Reporters circled. The vacuum of information fed anxiety on every side. And then the biggest shock yet landed. A senior figure, respected, untouchable, privately expressed concern that leaving Caitlin off the final roster could cause backlash the program wasn't prepared to handle. Not because of fans alone, but because of what it would signal to the next generation watching closely. The concern wasn't moral. It was strategic. That realization rattled everything. Because suddenly, Caitlin wasn't just a player being evaluated. She was leverage, and the system didn't know whether to neutralize it or embrace it. The next practice felt like a standoff disguised as basketball. Caitlin was unleashed and restricted at the same time. She ran sets, then was pulled. She created runs, then watched from the sideline. The oscillation was exhausting by design. A test of resilience. A test of compliance. She passed both, just not in the way they expected. Instead of forcing hero moments, she elevated others. Instead of dominating the ball, she bent the defense with gravity alone. Instead of fighting the system, she exposed its dependence on her presence. The gym couldn't deny it anymore. When Caitlin was engaged, the game opened. When she wasn't, it shrank. That night, as players packed up, a quiet rumor spread that the final decision was no longer about basketball at all, that it had escalated into something existential, that someone high up had said the words no institution ever wants to hear. If we choose wrong here, it won't blow over. Caitlin walked out last again, the echo of bouncing balls still ringing faintly behind her. She didn't look back. Selection day was approaching, and whatever choice Team USA made next would either confirm that evolution was welcome or expose just how far the system would go to protect itself from change. The only certainty was this. The explosion at that practice had already altered the trajectory. Now the fallout was unavoidable. By sunrise, the fallout had already escaped the walls of the practice facility and detonated online. It didn't come from an official statement. It came from whispers, cropped clips, and the kind of half-confirmed insider posts that ignite fan bases faster than facts ever could. A 10-second video surfaced first. Caitlin Clark sprinting into a defensive rotation, barking instructions, clapping her hands with visible fury, then drilling a shot that made the gym go silent. No context. No audio beyond sneakers and breath. Just energy so raw it felt confrontational. The internet did the rest. Within hours, timelines were split down the middle. One side saw leadership, hunger, a generational player refusing to dim herself. The other framed it as defiance, ego disruption. Hashtags trended. Former players chimed in with carefully vague posts about buying into the system. Analysts argued on morning shows without ever saying her name, which somehow made it worse. Caitlyn's name didn't need to be spoken. It dominated everything anyway. Team USA still said nothing. That silence turned combustible. Fans started asking questions the league wasn't prepared to answer. Why did every clip of intensity from Caitlyn get labeled emotional, while identical behavior from others was praised as competitive fire? Why did practice footage suddenly vanish from official channels after she spiked engagement numbers? Why were anonymous sources suddenly everywhere, all repeating the same word, difficult? Caitlyn felt it all before she ever opened her phone. In the locker room, the air had changed. Conversations stopped when she walked in, not out of malice, but fear. No one wanted their body language misread. No one wanted to be seen as choosing sides. A younger player sat next to her anyway, shoulder to shoulder, deliberately. The gesture was small. It meant everything. Across the room, a veteran stared at her shoes, jaw tight. This wasn't about Caitlyn anymore. It was about what her presence was forcing everyone else to confront. The uncomfortable truth that the system rewarded compliance more consistently than brilliance. When Caitlyn finally checked her phone, she didn't scroll long. The praise was overwhelming. So was the backlash. Screenshots of alleged insider quotes circulated wildly, some real, some fabricated, all damaging. One post claimed she'd refused coaching. Another suggested she was bad for chemistry. None cited sources. None needed to. The narrative had momentum now. Sponsors noticed. Not in the way fans expected. One brand quietly paused a campaign. Another doubled down, releasing a cryptic ad centered on the word unapologetic. Media requests flooded in, each one more loaded than the last. Caitlyn declined them all. Silence, she knew, could be weaponized, but it could also be strategic. Behind closed doors, panic was spreading. League officials monitored the reaction metrics in real time. Engagement was spiking at levels usually reserved for finals games, not practices. The concern shifted from roster balance to reputational risk. Emails flew. Calls stacked. Someone suggested a statement. Someone else warned it could make things worse. Kathy Engelbert's name was invoked more than once, always followed by pauses heavy with implication. The locker room tension spilled onto the court that evening. Warm-ups were rigid. Jokes disappeared. The joy that usually softened pressure at this level evaporated. Caitlyn went through her routine with surgical focus, every movement sharp, deliberate. When drills started, she exploded again, not louder, not angrier, but more precise. Passes hit hands exactly where they should. Rotations snapped into place around her. The game looked easier when she dictated its rhythm, and that terrified people who had built systems on predictability. After practice, a staffer accidentally left a whiteboard visible longer than intended. Someone snapped a photo. It didn't show plays. It showed names grouped, circled, rearranged. Caitlyn's name sat alone on one side. That image went viral within minutes. Comment sections turned savage. Fans accused the program of isolation tactics. Former athletes shared stories that felt uncomfortably similar. The narrative hardened. This wasn't about one player. It was about control versus evolution. Caitlyn's family reached out. Old coaches texted. Even rivals sent quiet messages of support. She absorbed it all without responding publicly. Her calm unnerved people more than anger ever could. It suggested confidence or preparation. Late that night, an off-the-record report dropped from a respected journalist. Carefully worded. No accusations. Just one line that hit like an earthquake. Multiple sources indicate the internal debate is no longer about performance, but about precedent. Precedent. If Caitlyn stayed and thrived, the door opened for future stars who refused to shrink. If she was sidelined, the message would be clear. Brilliance was welcome, but only on the system's terms. The emotional weight of that decision pressed on everyone. Caitlyn sat alone in her hotel room, lights off, replaying the practice in her head. Not the shots. Not the noise. The looks. The pauses. The moments where the game felt free, and the moments it felt strangled. Her phone buzzed once more. A single message. No sender name saved. Just a sentence. Be ready tomorrow. Everything changes. She didn't know if it was a warning or a promise. But she knew one thing for certain. The fallout was no longer theoretical. It was coming straight for her. And for Team USA. and by morning, someone would have to choose a side. The next morning didn't begin with a whistle. It began with a leak. At 7:12 a.m., a private Team USA group chat screenshot hit social media like a grenade. Names blurred, timestamps intact. A single line circled in red. "We can't let one player hijack the tone of this camp." The internet didn't need context. They filled it in themselves, and every assumption pointed in the same direction. Caitlin Clark. By the time she arrived at the facility, reporters were already waiting behind barricades that hadn't been there the day before. Cameras followed her every step, zooming in on her face, searching for cracks, rage, tears, anything. She gave them nothing. Head up, jaw set, calm that felt louder than shouting. Inside, the energy was feral. Coaches huddled in corners, voices low but sharp. Assistants checked phones between drills like addicts. Players avoided eye contact, not out of hatred, but survival. Everyone understood what was happening. The practice explosion had become a referendum. On power, on control, on whether the future of women's basketball would be built around stars who refused to mute themselves. Warm-ups barely finished before tension snapped. A drill broke down. A missed rotation. Caitlin called it out instantly. Not disrespectful, not personal, just urgent. The response was immediate and icy. A whistle cut through the gym. That's enough. The words weren't loud, but they landed like a slap. Caitlin froze. So did everyone else. The coach didn't look at her right away. That pause said more than any lecture. When eye contact finally came, it wasn't instructional. It was evaluative. As if she were no longer just a player, but a problem being measured. "Let's reset the tone," the coach said, carefully neutral. "We don't need theatrics." The word theatrics echoed. Caitlin nodded once and stepped back into position, but something shifted inside her. Not anger. Clarity. She played the next sequence flawlessly, hitting reads before they formed, creating space that didn't exist seconds earlier. The gym couldn't deny her impact. That only made the silence louder. Then came the twist no one expected. Mid-practice, a staffer entered with a tablet and whispered to the head coach. Drills stopped. Players gathered instinctively, confusion rippling through the group. The coach cleared their throat. "Roster discussions are happening faster than planned," they said. "Nothing is final. Chemistry first." That phrase detonated online within seconds. Fans saw it for what it was, a coded warning. Caitlin saw it as something worse, a setup. If she played smaller, she disappeared. If she stayed herself, she risked being blamed for division she didn't create. The practice ended without resolution. No speeches. No reassurance. In the locker room, the air was electric with things unsaid. Angel Reese laughed too loudly at a joke that wasn't funny. Paige Buchers sat quietly, lacing her shoes twice. Aaliyah Boston stared straight ahead, breathing slow, as if grounding herself before something heavy landed. Caitlin changed in silence. Then the door closed. A meeting was called. Mandatory. No media. No phones. The head coach stood at the front, flanked by staff. The message started polished, corporate, safe, values, unity, standards. Then it sharpened. "There's concern," the coach said, "that certain styles of leadership are clashing with established culture." No names. No denials. Everyone knew. Caitlin felt eyes flicker toward her, then away. She waited. When it became clear no one else would speak, she did. "What's the culture?" she asked. The room stiffened. "Is it winning?" she continued, voice steady but cutting. "Is it accountability? Or is it silence? A beat." 2. The coach didn't answer directly. "This isn't about you personally." That was the lie that changed everything. Caitlin nodded again, slower this time. "Then don't make it about me." The meeting ended abruptly. Within an hour, another leak surfaced, this one more dangerous. An anonymous source close to the program claimed Caitlin had pushed back aggressively in meetings and questioned authority. The framing was surgical. Not explosive enough to deny outright. Just enough to stain. Sponsors panicked. One quietly asked for clarification. Another requested a pause until the situation stabilizes. Meanwhile, Caitlin's jersey sales spiked. Her name trended globally. The public had chosen, even if the program hadn't. Then came the call. Caitlin was pulled aside before dinner and escorted to a private office. Inside sat 2 officials she hadn't expected. One from the league. One from USA Basketball's upper leadership. No coach present. That absence said everything. They spoke in calm tones, rehearsed careful. praised her talent, acknowledged her impact. Then the pivot. "We're concerned about distractions," one said. "This environment is fragile. Fragile. Like glass. Like something that shatters when pressure exposes flaws." Caitlin listened, arms crossed, pulse steady. "So what are you asking?" she said. A pause. Longer than comfortable. "We're asking you to consider adjusting," they replied. "For the good of the group." There it was. Not a benching. Not a cut. Something worse. A request to shrink. Caitlin leaned back in her chair. For the first time since the chaos began, she smiled, but it wasn't soft. "I didn't come here to be manageable," she said quietly. Silence swallowed the room. That night, her agent called. Voice tense. "We've got a situation." "What kind?" Caitlin asked. "The kind where they're floating alternatives. Contingencies. Messaging plans." "For what?" she pressed. A breath on the other end. "For if you're not on the final roster." The words hit hard, but not unexpected. Caitlin ended the call and stared out the window, city lights blurred by rain. She thought about every gym she'd ever walked into, every time intensity had been mistaken for arrogance, every moment she'd been told to wait her turn while delivering more than asked. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a teammate. Then another. Then another. Short messages. Quiet support. Fear mixed with admiration. No one wanted to be next. Across the internet, a new clip began circulating. Unedited footage from practice. Caitlin diving for a loose ball. Popping up. Pointing. Leading. No anger. Just fire. The caption read, "This is what they're scared of." By midnight, it had millions of views. Inside league offices, emergency calls stacked up. The narrative was slipping out of their hands. Every attempt to soften the story only hardened public suspicion. The more they spoke about balance, the more fans heard control. And then, just before dawn, Caitlin received a final notification. An official schedule update. Her name had been removed from the next day's featured practice session. No explanation. No announcement. Just absence. And in that empty space, a single question screamed louder than any crowd ever could. Was this the beginning of her exile? Or the moment she forced the entire system to show its true face? Caitlin Clark's absence from the featured practice wasn't just noticed, it detonated. Fans refreshed feeds obsessively. Analysts paused mid-sentence on live TV, and former players broke their own silence with pointed emojis and unfinished thoughts. The phrase, "not injury-related," spread like wildfire, because everyone knew what it meant. This wasn't about health. This was about control. Outside the Team USA facility, a crowd gathered that hadn't been scheduled, organized, or sanctioned. They came anyway. Handmade signs. Clark jerseys. Phones held high. Inside, staff watched from tinted windows, as if witnessing something they hadn't planned for and couldn't stop. The narrative had escaped. Social media became a battleground within hours. Clips of Caitlin's explosive practice energy, her voice echoing, her hands directing traffic, her intensity undeniable, were reposted with captions that cut deep. Leadership isn't quiet. They don't want stars, they want obedience. Every repost widened the fracture between the league's messaging and the public's belief. Then came the reactions that mattered. A former Team USA legend tweeted a single sentence. "We used to celebrate fire." No names. No explanations. Just truth sharp enough to draw blood. Sponsors began recalculating in real time. One brand reversed its pause and issued a statement praising authentic competitiveness. Another doubled down on silence, which only fueled speculation that pressure was being applied behind closed doors. Caitlin's camp said nothing. That silence became its own thunder. Inside the locker room, the fallout was personal. Players who had avoided eye contact the day before now whispered in corners. Some were furious, not at Caitlin, but at the implication that passion was suddenly a liability. Others were scared. If this could happen to her, what did safety even look like? Angel Reese slammed her locker harder than necessary, muttering about double standards. Paige Buchers stared at her phone, reading the same headline over and over. The weight of the moment. Coaches tried to restore order, but authority felt thin. Every instruction sounded like subtext. Every correction felt political. The court, once sacred, had become a stage where every movement was interpreted through suspicion. Then the league spoke. A carefully worded statement dropped mid-afternoon, full of phrases like alignment, long-term vision, and collective harmony. Caitlin's name appeared exactly once. The backlash was immediate and brutal. Fans dissected every comma. Analysts called it corporate gaslighting. Hashtags exploded, demanding transparency, accountability, answers. The statement didn't calm anything. It confirmed the fear that something was being managed rather than addressed. Caitlyn finally broke her silence, not with words, but with action. She posted a single clip. No caption, no commentary, just raw footage from a previous practice. Her sprinting the floor, calling out coverage, celebrating a teammate's bucket with ferocity. The video ended with her laughing, breathless, alive. The message was unmistakable. This is who I am. The post shattered engagement records. Within minutes, current and former players liked it. Some commented with fire emojis. Others stayed quiet, but didn't look away. The divide was no longer hidden. It was public, emotional, and irreversible. Behind the scenes, emergency meetings stacked on top of each other. League executives debated optics versus precedent. USA basketball officials argued over whether pulling back now would look like weakness or wisdom. The word regret was whispered more than once. Then came the leak that changed everything. An internal memo surfaced, timestamped days before the explosive practice, outlining concerns about media dominance and individual narrative overshadowing team messaging. Caitlyn's name was redacted, but no one needed it filled in. The implication was devastating. This wasn't a reaction. It was premeditated. The public reaction turned volcanic. Fans accused the system of punishing excellence. Commentators questioned whether women's basketball was eating its own future out of fear. Even neutral voices began asking the question no one in power wanted spoken out loud. Was Caitlyn Clark being sidelined not for what she did, but for what she represented? As night fell, pressure mounted from every angle. Calls came in from Olympic committees. Broadcasters warned of ratings consequences. Sponsors hinted at reconsiderations. The cost of the decision was becoming impossible to ignore. And then, just before midnight, Caitlyn received an email marked urgent. Subject line, revised roster discussion, attendance required. No context. No reassurance. She stared at the screen, heart pounding. Not with fear, but with resolve. Because whatever came next wouldn't just decide her place on a team. It would decide what the future of women's basketball was willing to look like. And somewhere inside league headquarters, someone finally asked the question they should have asked from the start. What happens if she doesn't back down? This is the moment where the story stops being theirs and becomes yours. If you felt that jolt in your chest reading this, if you sense the pressure, the politics, the quiet fear of what happens when excellence refuses to shrink, then you already understand why this moment matters. Caitlyn Clark's fire didn't just light up a practice court. It exposed a fault line running straight through women's basketball, through power, through who gets celebrated and who gets managed. And now the league is standing at the edge, staring down the consequences of its own decisions. So don't look away, because silence is exactly what systems rely on when they want the storm to pass without changing anything. Every comment, every share, every conversation keeps the spotlight where it belongs, on the truth, not the spin. The players feel it. The executives feel it. The sponsors definitely feel it. Momentum only dies when people stop paying attention. Ask the hard questions out loud. Why is passion praised one moment and punished the next? Who decides when leadership becomes too much? And why does authenticity suddenly become a problem only when it can't be controlled? These questions don't disappear just because a press release drops or a meeting ends behind closed doors. If you believe women's basketball deserves honesty, not choreography, if you believe stars shouldn't have to dim their light to fit a narrative, then make your voice part of the noise they can't ignore. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Share this story with someone who still thinks this is just sports. Drop your take, even if it's uncomfortable. Especially if it's uncomfortable. Because the next decision won't happen in public. It'll happen in a room where power is counting reactions, measuring backlash, and deciding whether to double down or retreat. And what they see out here, your outrage, your support, your refusal to move on, will shape what they do in there. This isn't over. Not even close. The next chapter is already being written, and the only question left is whether it ends in accountability or in a cover-up no one forgets.